would like to call to order the February 4th, 2019 Cabarrus County Board of Commissioners work session. Welcome, everyone. We've got a full house tonight. It's good to see everybody here. First item on our agenda is approval of the work session agenda, including the changes on page 2. Do I hear a motion to approve? Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there discussion? All in favor, please say aye. All opposed, no. That motion passes, and we move to discussion items. First up, from Infrastructure and Asset Management, is a parking deck update, and we're happy to have Kyle Billafer to update us on that.
To the board, I came up last month and gave an update, so wanted to give another update. We are still projected for March 1st, open to the public date that morning. And as you know, the actual grand opening ceremony has been scheduled for the 27th. We are obviously having some issues with weather, so I did want to give the board an update. In terms of a construction project of this magnitude, typically the industry standard is to take the average mean of bad weather days for such a region and calculate that into your bid, which is what was done. In excess of that, we've had 23 extra days of weather. So if you know anything about moving that much dirt and putting in that much concrete, and of course an entire brick facade, it's been very challenging. What the board will notice and what the public will notice when we do open up the building, the biggest, deficiency will be the lack of landscaping, and that is primarily because of the weather. So we're already working with the City of Concord to make sure that we're able to get a TCO based on the promissory of the landscaping going in as the weather cooperates more. So I did want to prepare the board for that. Is not all of the landscaping will be in place by the time that we open up to the public, unless we have an extremely very nice change of weather very, very quickly. Other than that, we are on target for everything. We actually had our generator training today with staff, and we begin some of our final concrete punches to make sure that the condition or the finish of the actual concrete throughout the deck is the way that we want it. We start that this Friday, and then a week after that, and sprinkled in between there, we have training with all of our operations staff on everything from fire alarm control panels to elevators to flooring material to everything. So we are still on target for March 1st.
I don't understand what you're talking about. Weather problems. It's 70 degrees outside. The sun is shining.
I know. There is no problem at all.
Good. Are there other questions for Kyle? Okay, very good. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, next up from the Sheriff's Office, we're happy to have Chief Deputy James Bailey with us. Let's talk about the Government Services Division and Sheriff Van Shaw. Looks like Van's going to do the talking.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your time this afternoon. I wanted to bring before you something that we're proposing and working towards due to some information that has come about here recently, and more or less a consolidation of several things that we do on a daily basis. One of the things in the reorganization of the Sheriff's Office I did was to put a number of entities within the Sheriff's Office under one captain. And those entities primarily deal with different type of governmental operations that go on, like animal control, like the animal shelter, the courthouse, those type, our 911 center, that tend to work with other entities in government as well, and certainly most of them having a close interaction with the public. So what you see before you is a subgroup of that. What I have, or we are currently considering and proposing, is to create a unit within that group called the Government Security Division. And the purpose, if you'll do the next slide, behind this is to provide for consistent and coordinated security for Cabarrus County governmental facilities, county employees, and the citizens that served at each of these locations. So it's what you'll see is this is a consolidation, but also encompassing some other areas that are coming forward. So in the next slide, right now, currently, Our office has a full-time deputy assigned, as you know, to Department of Health and Human Services. So that deputy is there every day, Monday through Friday, to provide security services. We also have a deputy that's assigned to the Concord branch of the library and provides security services there. A couple of months back, we put an additional 20 hours of coverage for the library to address the gap that was there on Saturdays in the evenings related to issues in and around the library, to make those employees feel more comfortable, as well as for coverage for citizens that are there as well, and dealing with issues that might arise. We also have a deputy that's assigned to provide the security for the daily financial escort, as well as security for county commissioner meetings. So these assignments, basically, if you take the 20 hours that we're doing now through overtime of additional deputies and the approximate 7.5 hours per week, we're doing an additional 27.5 hours of coverage in providing those security services. In addition to this, on the next slide, which has been the most recent development, and as Kyle just addressed, if you'll go in advance to the next slide for me, what is forthcoming is the county-owned parking deck in downtown Concord. I've had some conversations with Chief Gasick. He's included his city manager, and they have advised me that they will not be responding to general calls for service in the parking deck due to it being a county facility, much like at the library and DHHS, which is in Kannapolis, but we handle the calls there as well. So this brought about a number of concerns for me in that if they're not going to respond for calls for service there, that would fall back on our agency to do that. We presently do not have an officer assigned to patrol in the downtown Concord area. All our officers are out in zones that cover other areas. This is going to be similar in the case of what we do with the arena, in that we respond to calls for service and crimes that occur at the arena, even though it's in the city of Concord. So we're talking on a deck that has 614 spaces in it. There are going to be automobile accidents that occur in that deck. There's probably going to be crime in that deck in the form of larcenies from automobiles. Other concerns is it's utilized 24 hours a day. So that was part of what generated this discussion of, if we're going to have this responsibility, how do we cover it? And in the next slide, in order to provide that, we looked at a number of different things in providing that level of security and law enforcement. And we looked at all the existing concerns that we have at the different locations as a time to potentially consolidate these issues. Of course, we have an existing position at Human Services. We have an existing position there at Concord Library. One of the things we're proposing is a new position that would help cover the additional 20 hours of coverage at the library itself, also encompass in that position of the financial escort, and also any other issues that arise at primarily the Kannapolis branch, to where we could have a person that could coordinate any services that might need to be there, any investigative assistance that might need to be there, and then as well as having another position that would serve as a relief officer for these different locations. Because one of the problems we incur right now, and we're dealing with it currently, is we have one individual at each location. So when they're out for sickness, vacation, whatever the case may be, we have to pull an officer off patrol or out of another division and fill that position during that time period. So we actually have an employee that's out due to an extended illness with the Concord Library. So obviously we have a scheduling challenge. This additional position would give us that opportunity to have a relief person, but they would also be the primary response person to any parking deck response or crime prevention patrol that would be needed in the parking deck, as well as being able to do some pass-through walkthroughs of the governmental center as well. So if there was a security need here at the governmental center, this individual could be contacted and brought over here for whatever there may be. If you'll change the next slide for me. So this will allow for continuous coverage at the two current assignments and as well as I mentioned before, any personnel that are out, and will allow us to also carry out those other duties that we typically pull from other divisions. So whether it's an escort or security services for a meeting or whatever the case may be, those are pulled from different divisions as well, which takes them away from what they typically do on their day. Next slide, please. Also, we are looking at or proposing a supervisory sergeant for that. This person would manage the day-to-day supervision of that group, as well as coordinate all the security needs for county operations. So we would have a one-person contact for any security need as relates to any Cabarrus County governmental facility or event or whatever the case may be. It would be a one-stop shop, if you will, to be able to reach out if there's a need for it. We would propose that position be located in the front entrance of our sheriff's office. We have a vacant office that is there that already has the infrastructure that if we wanted to put video monitoring capabilities of cameras, we could actually have an individual that is monitoring those cameras as well as utilizing those from a crime prevention or crime solving standpoint. Plus, that would also give us an armed law enforcement presence on a more full-time basis at our entrance, but also at an area where their ability to respond to any emergency that might come up from that standpoint. So they would be that person that could be reached out currently if there's a need here. Calls are made over and we find someone to come over and stand by if there's, concern with a disgruntled employee or a disgruntled citizen that rises, or if there's a threat that has come in, which we do time to time get those, and there's a requirement for law enforcement presence, then we simply scramble to find someone to bring over here, is what we currently do. If you'll go to the next slide. Other additional benefits is that routine presence in the governmental center. As we said, it would be more of a walk-through presence, but the flexibility would be there that if there was a need for it to remain for multiple hours, they could do that. It would also provide for the response to the calls for service related to the parking deck, especially during peak usage time, which we realize that the jury pools are going to be parking in the parking deck, most likely. The individuals that are coming to court are going to be parking in the parking deck. So we estimating and looking at the daily number of people that are coming in and out of our courthouse is also along with coming to other things like the governmental center and the parking with other city employees. You're probably looking at a daily usage of maybe 200, 250 once people become aware of the deck and it's something that they use and becomes a routine. And this is all prior to the opening of the new courthouse once it's completed. This would also, as I mentioned, escort services that we may need, on-site emergency response as needed, in that we have a dedicated resource as opposed to a on-demand resource. Anything that relates to threat on employees, we could deal with those as they come in. Sometimes they do require some investigative effort on a very limited basis, so that could be handled. And then an increased focus on any security concerns related to the exterior of county buildings in the downtown area. We occasionally have those things come up that are concerns about individuals being around after hours, just in and around, whether they're deciding to spend the night on the courthouse steps or in and around adjacent other county buildings. We have to deal with that as well. And then, as I said earlier, a coordinated point of contact, but we would also task this individual sergeant would be also a point of contact for our county recreation facilities, especially, for example, Frank List Park and Camp Spencer, and that they would have someone that they could reach out to, and if there's an ongoing problem or issue at those locations, we could address that as well. So it's a comprehensive approach that provides for needs, provides for future needs as we see it. One example of future needs may be when we start the construction of the new courthouse, there's going to be construction activity in and around the courthouse there's going to be theft. There's going to be issues that we're going to be responsible for. So if we can take a preventive effort in trying to reduce those, that helps us all, as well as alleviating our manpower issues as it relates to those three divisions. Each one of those are contributing at some level manpower to address these issues already. So they're being pulled offline or out of service in order to go deal with these things. So this is something that we have pulled together, wanted to have a discussion about the feasibility of it from a standpoint of obviously future budget issues, but also of a need analysis from the standpoint of what we're seeing and what others may be seeing from that standpoint. So I wanted to bring this to you for a discussion to talk about as we move through, and I guess the urgency that I came to you with, or the need to go ahead and do it now, was the opening of the deck on March 1st, and an understanding that I have with the chief of police. Right now, our understanding is that we will deal with issues within the parking deck during the daytime hours and address those and respond to those. And he assured me that they will continue to provide assistance to us on an emergency basis or in the late evening hours, that if there was an emergency within the parking deck, they would be the primary response, and then we would have the follow-on responsibility of dealing with those issues. So, like I said, I wanted to bring this before you for discussion, for your consideration, and also come to you with a solution, as opposed to just pointing out an issue that needs attention.
Sounds like a well-thought-out plan to me.
Well, thank you.
Questions, commissioners?
I just have one, Mr. Chairman. And Sheriff, on our manpower, you mentioned manpower. There was a time in the recent past that we were short considerable deputies. How are we doing on that now?
We've made tremendous progress. We've hired, since December 3rd, we've hired in excess of 10 full-time officers that are already sworn or have completed basic law enforcement training, which has filled a number of our vacant positions. Prior to December 3rd, we also were hiring. We're having great success. I can tell you that we've got interviews ongoing. I did an interview Friday. We've got another one that's coming in this week as well. So we're moving forward at a really good pace, to be honest with you, and being able to fill those. For example, our Harrisburg community, right now, we're entirely full, except for the proposed 2 new positions, which is something we haven't had. Our patrol squads are generally full. They were until we just promoted 3 lieutenants. So that creates a trickle-down effect, but we've got a number of people trained that are in our detention facility. We'll be bringing some of those out to fill those positions. So we do see it as something that we will be able to staff, and we would put a priority on staffing it and getting it up to a level. I have a plan to utilize a sergeant to go ahead and move into that position, as well as staffing for an immediate additional person to be able to deal with the deck and make sure we don't have any gaps of service there.
That's great. You answered my question fully. Thank you.
Okay, other questions?
Just real quick, and this, the County Manager Downs may know this, but, or Kyle, but do we have security cameras that are part of the finish work at the deck? I know we put sleeves and conduit all over the place, but I just wasn't sure. Okay. You couldn't get away from a question about the deck.
The answer is no, we do not. We have everything in place, but we have not pulled the trigger on those cameras. I believe Mr. Shanley with the ITS department could probably get us a proposal on them, but it's nothing that we've pursued. We have the blue light stations in place and the pay kiosks, and that's it.
And one of the things, to speak to the cameras, we have discussed as recently as today is the idea of incorporating those cameras into one location where we can monitor those. We discussed reusing some monitors from the old EOC as a cost savings. There's plenty of room in that vestibule office that's there that makes that, number one, a high visibility office, but also the ability to put those monitors in there and monitor them and be able to use those as far as solving crime or hopefully potentially preventing crime as it may be. And so it is one of those nice things that we've got the space available and the right location to be right there at the front door and have it available as well. So we did discuss some of that. So, and that system can grow as we're able to do things and put things in place. If we simply started out with a couple of cameras that have the capability of reading license tags as they leave the facility, that would be a great help in that we know time frames and identification and those types of things would help. So it doesn't have to be an all or nothing type approach. It can be built out as we want it to be, as however robust we want it to be as we move through.
I guess that's just something we're gonna have to discuss as we move. There's a lot, I guess, there's a lot of things we're gonna have to discuss with the opening of the parking deck.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. And just I just wanted to clarify, the very first slide, the 7.5 hours, the little bullet at the bottom, was that each line of that took 7.5 hours, or the last line is the 7.5 hours?
It is a combination of all. We typically, what I did was, we typically run somewhere between an hour and an hour and a half every day on financial escort, depending on how many locations they need to go to, whether it's a return with additional money. Then I did a monthly average of a 3-hour commissioners meeting. And so as it works out on a weekly basis, we're typically, the financial escorts, we're spending about 7 hours a week. And then if you take the 3 or 4 hours for the commissioner meeting, that's about a half hour a week. And that's in addition to the 20 hours of additional coverage that was added to the library security plan that occurred just a couple of months ago.
I do recommend that we move forward on this. Again, the sheriff has identified some needs that we are, and was willing to talk about some needs that we've been experienced over the years, again, with human services and other places when the deputies are on vacation or on training, which is a lot of days a year, there's nobody there. So we want to make sure they're there. We can work it out financially where it won't cost anything for the rest of the year. He can use some of his vacant positions and continue recruiting for them, and we could pay for, go ahead and bring people in using those positions, and then at the budget time, then we would switch it back over and add on the additional three employees. But we would prefer and recommend that you do it now instead of waiting till July.
Is this something that we have included in our agenda for our regular meeting, or?
I don't see it. That's a question I was gonna have.
No, we did
can
not
add it,
include
I
it. We
guess.
wanted to wait and see how the discussion was going here. And if you so choose, then we can add it, we can add that as a new item on the regular agenda.
Certainly seems like if there's not an extra budget impact between now and then, and we can go ahead and get it situated, I would be in favor of not doing that, or I'm not opposed to doing that.
Okay, when we approve our regular meeting agenda, if it pleases the board, we can add that item into either consent or general items as well. We thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we move now to discussion items for action. First up, 4.1, design contract and proposed project schedule. And Kyle Bilfer and a number of other people are back with us.
I'm actually going to introduce them all. We have Tom Potts, who is the principal with Stilling Architects, our design architect. Good evening. Of course, you all know Honorable Judge McGee. And Jody Driggs will be the project manager for Stilling for a bulk of this project. And he'll actually, as we start to get into the presentation and look at the massing concepts, Jody will kind of take over the control and point out on the board. So I just kind of wanted to point out some historical details about this project. Looking back at my records, the first space needs study that we did while I was on staff here was presented to the board in July of 2009. So that's when it started, going and looking at other courthouses. And since then, we've been through 2 space needs updates. But it was kind of interesting to look at all the people that were on that committee that went through it back in 2009, looking how we were going to expand. I believe only 3 of us are still in our current positions or have an involvement with it now. So just looking back on it to give you all some history, because as we start to discuss this, in terms of we've gone back and reprogrammed everything, and that's what Silling has just had their first contract in place for, is to go back through the programming process with the courthouse staff. And obviously, you've heard some tidbits of that. I've been coming up and giving the board updates. But I wanted to let you know, as we move forward, whether I'm up here with a construction manager at risk, or whether I'm up here with Silling, or whether I'm up here with the courthouse staff, I will most likely be up here every month giving you an update of where we are in the progress. And the reason that is, and you'll understand once we get through this presentation, the actual milestones on the schedule. So just the design schedule, take the construction off of the table at this point. The actual milestones to be met in terms of the design process are going to be strict at best. Meaning if we have to get public input, we've got to hit it right then. And if we need to bring it in front of you and get board approval, we need to. And if we don't, we can't move forward with the next part of the process. And that all impacts when we can start digging across the street. And obviously, I just throw it out based on the presentation I just came to give about the parking deck. Weather and time of year will be a significant impact on this project in terms of your first stages, which is theoretically digging a large hole in the ground, but also, and this will come up later in this presentation, it's the enabling of the current building to accept the future building. So it's not just digging a hole in the ground for the new courthouse. There are certain changes and modifications and temporary and permanent alterations we'll need to make to the existing courthouse annex, the connection to the tunnel, and all of those things that go into it that will need to be enabled or done. So meeting all of our milestones as we start to view the schedules or the proposed schedules, you'll understand why they become so important. And I kind of wanted to just give a little bit of a brief introduction on that. So I will kind of turn it over to Tom. I will tell you that the goal of this is for the design contract to be approved. The design contract is made up of several AIA contracts. Our attorney has reviewed those contracts. This is the first part of the puzzle to actually move forward with design, and you'll see the different contracts that are attached to it and what they mean, because you have different contracts for commissioning, you have different contracts for furniture and equipment, so it's all clearly laid out. But we have already had several meetings with Silling Architects and our attorney to go through all these standard AIA contracts, and they all work off percentages of the actual GMPs or the budgets. So again, I will preface this presentation by saying you need to keep that in mind, that to get to a GMP, you have to do a design. But the cost of the design is related to the GMP. So this circle will come up several times in our discussion, and I wanted to kind of get that out of the way right now. So I will turn it over to Tom, and he can kind of walk you through the programming process and some of our test fit urban response massing studies and show that.
Thank you, Kyle, and good evening. If you would, Lauren, the first slide. Maybe the second slide there. What we'd like to walk through here to just kind of underscore what Kyle was talking about is to give you is my microphone working? Give you an update on our programming process, and then my business partner Jody here is going to walk through a test fit massing study, which we've arrived at. Give you a sense of what the scope of that project means in terms of square footage, how big it is, number of courtrooms, the data that's included in that. Also talk about the schedule that Kyle was talking about. Give you a sense of the rough order of magnitude for the entire project cost, and then that will lead to a discussion about our contracts because they're all related. Good, Lauren. So this slide is just a little bit of a history lesson. We started on our work on April the 19th, I believe. We were in the courthouse for really on site every day for 2 weeks. It was very important for us to be able to observe the court at depth. I think that we attended every single court type that you could have, every type of proceeding that was available and was on the court docket. We had an opportunity to sit through those sessions, perhaps an hour. Sit through an entire jury trial just to see how the court operated. We wanted to truly understand how Cabarrus County operated from a court standpoint. I think there were some discussions with the judges, with some of the staff, with private attorneys, the users. That was a preliminary discussion. Then we had a little bit of a respite on the 24th of May and I think the 6th of June. I think there were a number of courthouse tours that we took, and we took that with the judges, with the staff, and it was walking through those courthouses and getting a sense of kind of the do's and don'ts. What works, what would work well for Cabarrus County, how would the court function, those kind of things, just understanding, really kind of learning from our peers. After that, we came back to the courthouse and started into a second round of questioning and understanding and observations of the space planning needs of each one of the offices, really in order to develop a detailed understanding of space planning needs for the new court facility. Once we had a sense of what that looked like, then we started into actually developing test fit studies. And so test fit studies aren't full designs. They're moving blocks around on the site. It was very important for us to understand the urban fabric of downtown Concord and how this building was going to fit within Concord. And we'll show you that here in a moment. But really began to develop how the building might operate, how big in scale it might be, how it would interact with the site, how it would interact with the existing building, what's usable in the existing building, what spaces do we need. We developed a number of them. You can see I've got it there in red, 5 test fit options. I think there were a little bit more. There was kind of a question mark. So we really did study this early on to try to get the best sense of what the best solution might be. Part of this was doing a number of reviews with the users, questioning whether what we had in the scope was right, accurate, did it work. And then once we got to a place where we felt like we had the best choice, then what we did was we went and we did our ref order of magnitude pricing. So even though your construction manager at risk is not under contract, they were generous enough to work with us and give us their time in pricing this one solution, or actually several solutions, until we got to a place where we felt like this was the best solution for us to move forward. And so we arrived at that favored option in November. And so, Jody, I believe you're prepared here to walk through several slides that give you a sense of what the bigger picture issues of the building at this point.
Great. Thanks, Tom. What I'll say starting off is appropriate design really relies on a conversation. So as we begin to talk about these options, please feel free to jump in, ask questions, make comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts as we talk through it. You know, as designers and as your architect here, we ultimately have to kind of invest in who you are and take ownership of what this project is about and where it is located. And we've really enjoyed kind of diving in and getting to study and know Cabarrus County and the city of Concord. And one of the documents that we came upon early in our research was this document. This is from the Downtown Master Plan, which was developed for the city of Concord by another firm. It was, I think this is several years old, but it was a great document, talked about a lot of the history and the past of the city, but also the future direction, opportunities for future development. And in fact, in the middle of kind of the developmental framework portion of this document, even back then, there was already the notion that if this cursor will work, there was a potential project that might be located on the site that we are considering, the parking lot behind the existing courthouse. And that document started to suggest that here is the front door. I'm gonna relinquish control for a minute. And maybe go to full screen view. If view full screen. Right, there we go. Great, thank you. And so this document started to talk about the positioning of a potential new judicial center and had some relationship with the existing county administrative office building, which we're in now, and the jail building across the street. And you can see there was this kind of triangulation of front doors to become a node for community government. And as Tom suggested, mentioned, we studied multiple options, and this was one of the options we started to look at. And in thinking about a public building of this significance, really that public front door becomes the identity of the place. It's where the major interior public spaces are. It's where those public spaces are in dialogue with what should be meaningful outdoor public spaces. And we saw this maybe as, in a way, turning its back toward the center of downtown Concord and where the future development really wanted to take place. And it was going to be a missed opportunity. And so the preferred test fit option that we really arrived upon is founded upon this idea that the identity of this building can be more engaged with the kind of the heart, the pulse of downtown Concord, and in a lot of ways can continue to be connected to Union Street, but also spur future development onto Church Street and really reinforce the legacy of the courthouse here in Cabarrus County. So do I just click to fast forward? There we go. So this is the kind of a site diagram of how this test fit is working. And for orientation, you see the existing courthouse here near the bottom of the screen. The historic courthouse is located here, the county government center here. And so this dark kind of block represents a new addition to the existing courthouse. And to talk about just some of the pieces of how this is put together, as opposed to locating the entry, which is going to form the identity of this building here on the corner of Church and Corbin, we are suggesting that the new entry of the facility would be located here and start to occupy the area of Means Avenue. And this would be the new public entry that you can see these kind of yellow dotted lines represent pedestrian circulation from the new parking deck being constructed to the page south, as well as pedestrian circulation opportunities from the parking deck in the lower levels of this building and from folks that are circulating between the government office building over to the facility. And this becomes really the front door of the facility. Other kind of points of interest here, this becomes the pedestrian staff entrance to the building as a secondary secure way for staff to enter the facility. And then this red dashed line is indicating where vehicular circulation and service might come into the building, and that would be in the form of secure parking for staff, as well as potential delivery of detained defendants for the court's program. And again, what we really love about this is the notion of creating then a new kind of pedestrian plaza that serves the front door, that continues to be in dialogue with Union Street, just the way the courthouse has always been located on a public place, in dialogue with Union Street, going back to the historic building and the existing courthouse. So as we jump into some three-dimensional imagery, what I want to make sure is clear is that this is not an architectural exploration of character at all. The building materials and details and fenestration and those kinds of things are really a long way away from being developed. But this massing diagram is really meant to help kind of bring that siting diagram to life, help you understand the relationships of the building here in the city, start to get a sense of scale, height, and proportion. And what we've also started to imply here with the notion of kind of solid and then that somewhat transparent kind of skin is just so you can see where we think certain view opportunities are, where there are public spaces within the building that can engage great public spaces outside the building. So this is a bit of an aerial view looking down into what was Means Avenue as a vehicular street, now becoming Means Avenue as a pedestrian plaza, leading to this 1.5 or 2 story kind of entry element that feeds into the building. The bulk of the building that would serve the new judicial functions of the courthouse are in that 4-story kind of long linear element that fronts along Church Street. And then if you can kind of tell, the building as it starts to step down and connect to the existing courthouse steps down into a 3-story volume. And then that connects, and we are using and renovating all of the existing courthouse as well. So looking at that at a little bit more of a pedestrian view, or from Union Street, then this becomes the new Means Entry Plaza. Excuse me. Again, the detailing and the design of this plaza is really a long way from being developed. You see green spaces and how much is green and how much is hardscape. How we would really program this space, how the county and the city would use it, how it'd be lit and maintain safety and security and accessibility and maintenance. There's a lot of things to work out here, but again, the notion that the front door becomes kind of the headboard of this grand, beautiful public room that continues to honor and bring some focus to the historic courthouse to the page right. This is a view looking down Church Street, and you see the jail building in the distance, and you're starting to see the other side of this public entry that has a relationship with and a dialogue with Church Street, and pedestrians can kind of flow along and enter that space. You're starting to see the implication or the notion of a vertical circulation element be kind of a vertical marker to kind of anchor this corner of the building. And then in the four-story kind of body of the building that you see stretching off to the left would potentially be the pre-function spaces, the public circulation spaces along each floor that are feeding into the area where the new courtrooms would be located.
Is there a door that goes in from this side as well as the other side?
Yes, ma'am. There would be doors on this side of that public lobby space
Also
as
from
well
your
as the other.
dots to back, but I wanted to make sure.
Yes, yes.
And again, that would be flushed out in the design, as I've had some discussions with courthouse security about what that would mean in terms of line of sight of security. So that would be one of the issues. I've gotten that same question in terms of how accessible is it from church, meaning are you able to, you have to walk around the whole thing to get in? And some of that's going to fall into security.
This is a more of an aerial view, again, just to kind of maybe get a sense of orientation and general scale. So you see this four-story kind of element that runs the length of Church Street. It's a large building program. It really, we're able to keep it down at 4 stories by maximizing the length of the site and really moving that entry element out into the footprint of Means Avenue, and then stepping down into that 3-story kind of connector piece as it reaches out and touches the existing courthouse. And then just a bit of a view from the intersection here at Church and Corbin. Again, you're seeing kind of the transparent 3-story element kind of riding above, thank you very much, the streetscape there that would be an opportunity for all of that interior public space, feeding the courtrooms within to really, again, bring transparency to the notion of the delivery of justice here for Cabarrus County, and have something that starts to animate the street with activity, and you would see your peers and your fellow citizens in the court's facility. And then off to the kind of the page left is more of the service-oriented side of the building. Again, remembering from the kind of the site diagramming, this would be the side where secure staff entry would be brought in kind of away from that public front door, and also the vehicular circulation into the lower levels of the building. Any questions about the test fit massing images that you've seen?
So following that up, just to give a sense of some of the data of the court, that's roughly 240,000 new square foot and 72,000 existing gross square foot. So it gives you a total of about 312,000 gross square feet. You can see that the courtroom would have 4 Superior Court jury-capable courtrooms, currently planned for 6 district courtrooms. And then there are 2 future courtrooms. One would be a triage courtroom, and then the potential footprint for 7 courtrooms, whether they're district or superior courtrooms. The office space is what you would expect to have within the judicial, in the courthouse. Judges' suites, clerk of courts, the DA, probation offices, your mediation space, and guardian ad litem. I think that it's important to point out that, as you can see in that last bullet point, there is shell space of 45,000 square feet of expansion that would be built in, that's in basically block area. And the current planning for that means that the second and the third floor of the existing courthouse would be shelled for future use. And there would be 14,000 square, and we would use the lower level and the first floor of the existing courthouse. And then the third floor of the new building would have 14,000 square foot of shell space. So you've got elbow room of 45,000 square feet to grow in the future. In addition to that, every single one of those office spaces is accounted for a 30-year projection that is tied to the AOC's staffing, the best that you can have a crystal ball and forecast your population and your staffing and so forth. So there is departmental elbow room, if you will, and then just raw space for future growth. And I think that's really important for this county, given its population growth. And I don't know, Judge, if there's anything that you would like to speak to with regard to some of the elbow room and the spaces that we've got in the building.
Well, thank you. First, I'd just like to thank you all and appreciate the opportunity to be here. I also certainly appreciate your asking the folks on our side of the street to participate in this. And folks have given freely of their time. The clerk's office, the DA's office, the district court judges, security, probation, and lawyers have all been willing to participate. There's a good number of us that travel to 6 courthouses to observe how they work and try to make sure that we also get the best information in terms of what our projected growth is going to be. We've been instrumental in trying to get that from AOC, and I believe they've used data from the National Center for State Courts in helping to come up with that. And so I see our role has been thus far as to help establish the needs or to get them in contact with the people that can provide the data for that, and then to try to work to see that there's a good fit between what the needs are and what is actually built. And I would just like to say I believe everybody on our side of the street is willing to volunteer and help in any way that you all would find to be helpful.
I want to shift gears here and kind of walk through a very preliminary project schedule, and I have 2 of them to show. And so these get a little bit complicated, so I want to keep this as simple as I can. And you can see the basic functions or activities that are there on the left. The top 3 are basically, those are design phases. So you work from schematic design to design development and construction documents. You move from where we are now to something that can be priced and constructed. Each one of those bars, there's an orange bar for design, there is a green bar for pricing where we coordinate with the construction manager at risk, and then there's a blue section which means that's requiring board approval. And this goes back to what Kyle was speaking of earlier, where each one of these steps has a specific for example, the schematic design phase has 4 months of design, but it's very important for us to get approval so that we can stay on track with the whole intent of, if you look in the purple bar, you can see the little man with the shovel there. The idea that construction wants to happen as early at that particular time. And if you kind of drew a line up, you'd see that that's happening, well, there's a date right there. It says August 1st, 2020. And that's really not a good time to be starting to build a building. You'd like to be able to build or start earlier in the year if you could, just to make the best use of the weather. But regardless, if we were able to start on the 1st of March, we've thought through this and said, what would it take for us to be able to get all the approvals necessary, to work with all the user groups, to have approval of the outside of this building, to define it in the way that needs to be, to have this back and forth collaboration with the construction manager at risk, to get us to a place where it could be approved, that this is what we consider to be under a single, what we call guaranteed maximum price construction contract. It would be, according to that schedule, would have us breaking or working on the project, turning it over to the CM on the 1st of August of 2020. You can see also there is a black square up there, which is project funding, which is roughly, about a 60-day window, I think, that you'd have to have. And all of that would kind of occur and come together so that the construction process on the new courthouse would be about a 27-month duration that last pink component is closeout and commissioning, so that occupancy for the new courthouse under the schedule would be perhaps the earliest that we could do would be December of 2022. Also, you might notice that there's another group of design activity that is occurring there. So if you kind of back up, what we intend to do, we have to know the total price of this project as best we can, all the way back in 2020, before they actually work on renovations of the courthouse. So it's imperative for us to get a guaranteed maximum price starting in the spring of 2020, but also to be able to land the exact price of, or a reasonable price, the estimate for the courthouse. So we're going to take that design through 85% so that we have enough information so that Messer's construction estimate along with the GMP really qualifies what our project budget is. And then we're going to set the design for the courthouse renovations down while the construction occurs for the new courthouse, and then come back up and pick up the design starting again, according to this schedule, roughly May the 1st of 2022, so that we could finish that design package and then do all of our coordination, pricing, guaranteed maximum price development, funding development, so that we can get to a place where we're then, once the new courthouse is occupied, you completely vacate the existing courthouse so that there's about a year's work for that courthouse, so that the project would be finished, again, according to this schedule, roughly the first of 2024. So you can see that it is, that what we're talking about is a 5-year engagement with us as the architectural and engineering firms that would be dealing with the project. So it's a long endeavor between start and completion. There's a couple of other pieces that are in there that I'll point out. The yellow blocks, at some point in time, very early in the process, we have to identify what the real furniture, fixtures, and equipment scope looks like. But that's a preliminary. And then when we start to get closer to the end of construction, at that point in time is when we're going to go out and we're going to finish our design and procurement packages for furnitures, fixtures, and equipment, so that all that can be ordered, placed in the building when we occupy it. So there are 3 separate pieces, if you will, of that furnitures, fixtures, and equipment. I realize this is a little bit complicated detail, but it is a kind of a complicated process. Having shared this with you, I want to open up the next, or go to the next slide. And this one contemplates what happens if the schedule, if our start date moves. So if you'll notice that start date on this construction, or this design phase, is 2 months later. So that's May 1st of this year. And so what does that do then? It starts to push our schedule out, and it really it puts our beginning of the construction process in jeopardy. So at this point, what we're considering is the contemplation of the schedule would be, or the delivery process would be altered so that we would provide 3 separate packages. And that first construction package, or GMP, I will note, this schedule shows 2 GMPs in red, but actually a 3rd GMP, which would be for what we call an enabling construction project. So that would be the demolition of parts of the courthouse, excavation of the site, site utilities, some foundation work, and so forth. It would be a much smaller package, but would allow us to make use of the early construction period, perhaps April the 1st, 2020, an early start, versus that much later start that you saw on the previous schedule. So it's our opinion that this schedule would serve the project better at this point, to be able to have 3 separate contracts with Messer, or your construction manager, excuse me.
The question the board might have is, why would we have to start in May versus March if we're here in front of you in February, and we'll go in front of the regular session to vote on their contract? What that involves is the abandonment of means, and just what is the status of means. If we will not have city approval for the abandonment of means and different agreements worked out with the private owners, the 2 owners that are on that street, right? We will not have that by March 1st. So with that being said, if we were to release Silling Architects to design on March 1st, they would be designing a footprint and spending the money designing a footprint that we actually, in reality, don't know 100% without a doubt that we have. And if we weren't able to get it and had to come back, that work would be wasted. And we would have paid for it, and we will pay again to redesign it in a different way.
Well, let me add to that. We have had preliminary meetings, very positive meetings with those adjacent owners who are affected by the closure of Means, but the public is also affected by that. So the city goes through a public process to consider that. We've also, with our attorney and theirs, had discussions on that process, and we feel good about that, but it is still a public process and needs to be approved, and there is some risk that it might not be. So that's where we look at that. We have hesitancy in starting full design without knowing that that will happen. And again, those meetings with the property owners are very good, but they have legitimate concerns. So we are moving forward very quickly in addressing those concerns and looking at how we can alleviate them to make sure that it works not just for us in terms of this project as it's been envisioned, but it also that it works for the city of Concord and it works for those adjacent owners.
So that is what spawned the design of this second schedule. And keep in mind, in the original schedule, when we were just going to start in March, still starting construction in August wasn't 100% the most favorable. Obviously, if you could start a little bit earlier, we gain time in terms of weather and good construction months, especially for what we're doing. So we had been discussing this early site, this enabling package from the beginning. So it turns it from a construction manager at risk contract that has 2 GMPs, it essentially changes it to 3 GMPs. So you're getting started earlier. So we were always going to have 2 GMPs, and now the option is on the table for 3 GMPs. And we have met, county staff has met, and we've talked with our finance director and talked about that. And it would require us to go out for debt earlier than we had originally planned for this. But there's also ways that there are certain, I guess, regulations and that we can work with to facilitate that. So it wasn't a stopping block in terms of moving forward.
What is the submittal schedule for Concord? What is best case scenario?
So we would go before them with a resolution, I believe it is, Mr. Cook, that he's preparing in March, and they would set a public hearing in April to consider this.
And all of this schedule facilitates the next contract that I'll be back up in here next month when we start looking at the construction manager at risk contract.
Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, if there are no further questions about the schedule here.
Is there a,
Yeah, just go back to the 3 GMPs, it was gonna be 2, 3, that's with you guys. Right? And then there's gonna be
The idea would be that the project is probably best served with 3 GMPs with Messer as the construction manager.
yes, a GMP
Okay.
contract is with the construction manager.
okay, well, that, somehow you lost me right at the very end, so just back up for just a second. I guess ultimately where I'm going, I may be jumping ahead. What's the dollar amount difference between, if you add up the 2, here's where we were gonna be. Now we're gonna add up 3, that's where we are.
Right.
So you don't have to answer that if you're getting to it, but I guess what I really wanna make sure I'm following is, so the architecture and engineering that you guys are gonna do, all of what we're seeing is under one contract with these guys? Or is it
No,
one
it's-
now and one later? Or is
No,
it-
it's multiple contracts. The design is a certain percentage to bring it up to the 85%. They also have a separate contract that is for FF&E, the furniture and the equipment.
Okay, right.
And then they have a separate contract that is for augmenting construction administration, meaning being on site and physically saying yes or no. So I guess, I think what you're asking, or even if this is not what you're asking, we do need to address it. By going with this early site and enabling package, there is an impact to the design contract costs. Okay, there is. It goes up because it means they have to start construction administration earlier. They have to come do construction administration earlier than they had planned while all this site work and enabling is done, then go back and then come back when they start to build the building. So it flips the rotation, and there has already been an estimate done on that cost.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. So I guess what I'm confused about, why is the CA under a different contract?
It is not. There's additional services under the contract, which is augmented. And we'll get into that here momentarily.
The next slide details what you're asking, the different breakdowns of the contracts.
I think what's important to think about with respect to what we have to do under this model is exactly what Kyle said. We have to turn on our construction administration services earlier in the game and longer. So that takes more people, more time, so forth. There's also a level of complexity in managing 3 different contracts that you would hold with the construction manager at risk. It's the idea of keeping track of paperwork and how it overlaps and the number of people involved. Just the level of complexity gets greater when you're managing 3 different construction contracts under the same project, in a sense, is what I'm saying. So.
Okay, no, I don't disagree with that. I just was not clear why we would have to have more than one contract with you guys.
We're right
Okay.
there, so okay. So before we get, that will be the next slide, but the first thing I want to talk about here was the rough order of magnitude,
Tom,
entire project cost.
Can we go back just for 1 second, Tom?
Sure.
Kyle, this would probably be for you. In the area there where the CMR construction, the new courthouse, it looks like it starts in April of 2020. What's that little section there? It's not coded in the bottom of the bar graphs.
That's the actual, that's literally starting to dig in the dirt. That's the early site package right there.
Is that
That's
what
the
you
s-
talked, you
Yes.
prefaced the
Yeah.
conversation about?
I think probably the term we've been using in the meetings that we're having with the architect and the construction manager at risk is, we're calling it an enabling project. It's pretty much enabling us to have the current courthouse ready to be able to accept this new building.
Well, there's no explanation on there, and I seen that. I'm saying, well, what, that 2 or 3 months, so that's what that was. I understand it now. Thank you.
As Kyle said earlier, we have a little bit of a circular kind of reasoning here where our contract is based on actual construction dollars. And so right now, you have to start with something. And again, this goes back to that test fit study that has been finished at this point, which shows a $100 million construction value. It's broken down with roughly about $3.5 million for site development, about $81.5 million for the new portion of the building, and roughly $15 million to renovate the existing building. So that is that dollar figure, that $100 million, will form the basis of our basic services compensation. So if you can kind of put a pin in that, and for a second we'll walk through these, quote, soft costs. There is furnitures, fixtures, and equipment, currently right now estimated at $3 million. And again, this is a rough estimate. Clearly, as we work our way through it, it gets more defined. The audiovisual equipment that would be in the building, primarily courtroom audiovisual equipment, is approximately $1 million right now. As you can see, the next 2 numbers are about our basic services design fee. The design portion of the fee is 5.75% of that $100 million. The basic construction administration is 1.25% of that $100 million. And then, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Now, well, part of that 5.75 million has to do with putting it in chunks, which I think is about being able to pay for it out of your current funding mechanism, which is part of the reason why it's broken down into pieces the way that it is. And we'll talk about that here in a moment. The next piece is the augmented construction administration. This is, if you're familiar with AIA documents, this is technically what the American Institute of Architects calls an additional service. So there's basic services that architects and engineers typically perform during the construction phase, and that is spelled out in your contract. But it doesn't include on-site project representation by the architects and the engineering staff. So in basic services, typically what we do is we in terms of our site representation, what it speaks to is being on-site at intervals that are appropriate to the construction process. And typically what that means is that we would be on-site, have our staff on-site probably twice a month. In talking with Messer, and certainly we understand that given the complexity and the scale of this building, being on site twice a month in support of this project it's not enough. And so this augmented construction administration, the $468,000, is a number where what we're trying to do is match our additional trips to the site based on the percentage of completion of the building. So at the very beginning of the project, the construction activity isn't that rigorous. Typically, a person on site several times a month during demolition and excavation and site utilities would be generally sufficient. But the more gets in place from a construction standpoint, the more there is for us to look at, the more there is for us to work out with the contractor. And so that additional construction administration services starts to ramp up from that point. And I've got a little bit of a chart in here on the next slide that speaks to that. So the other contract would be a furnitures, fixtures, and equipment design contract, and that is $320,000. It's roughly a percentage of those two. It's 8% really if you did the math of those two pieces, the $300,000 and the $1 million. So it's 8% of those numbers. There's a $10,000 bucket for reimbursable expenses. There is a third-party estimator. And now, this is not in our contract. This is the county would contract directly for that piece. And then there's third-party testing, which by code, we aren't allowed to do the testing. You have to hire someone to test concrete and steel and so forth. There's budgeted for $300,000. The county's already spent about $100,000 or close to it for some pre-design site engineering, such as surveying phase 1 and phase 2 and asbestos, and also is there some geotechnical information there as well. When the building gets finished, we're right now budgeting $300,000 for commissioning. That can be part of our contract and is included in our contract submittal. You can have commissioning by a third party. We just have it included in ours at this point in time. There's $140,000 the county would pay directly. We have a separate contract for construction imaging. That's so that you can take particular process photos, so you have a visual record. That, again, that's not in our contract. That's something that the county would separately procure. And then there's roughly $2.4 million, a rough estimate right now, that has to do with the property acquisition and utility relocation for Means Avenue.
And that's my number that I put in there. We do have utilities on both sides of the courthouse annex and then on Means. I put that number in to handle both. That is a shot in the dark, and I think it's an extremely high shot in the dark. And again, we have not pursued the conversations to iron out those numbers right there.
So right now, just a thumbnail, again, $15 million and change in soft cost and holding about a $5.6 million contingency. So a project that's just slightly north of $120 million. If we jump through that too quickly, but
Before we jump to that, so that's based on, what did you call it, the enabling schedule? I'll call it early site work.
The enabling schedule would
Waiting on Concord, having our public hearing, let's just think positive, we get that approved, and that's the second schedule, the number right there. So if you back up and say, well,
That's the first schedule.
that's the first.
this one's the first one.
Right, and
Oh, there's more to
there's-
come.
No. This was kind of done at the last minute. There's
Okay.
about a $10,000 a month delta. If we had to turn on our early site package, enabling package, and we have to do 6 more months of construction administration, it's about $10,000. It's $10,000 a month delta, difference over what you're seeing right there.
Okay, that's what I was after.
And that would go in the augmented construction administration
Yeah.
column. So the 468 would increase. And I've already shared that with the finance director, that would be an option if we end up on the second enabling schedule.
Okay.
This might speak more to the different contracts that would be in place with Silling, which is, again, what it's being brought to you in terms of your vote is the actual owner and architect agreement. Tom, you can go ahead.
Sure. It would be an AIA B-133. It's the standard form of agreement between the owner and architect for a construction manager at risk contract. As Kyle said, I guess we've worked through a lot of the review process with the county attorney. There's some slight modifications to it at this point.
Yes, we actually want to modify one of the sections that has to do with dispute resolution, so it matches the same type of dispute resolution that would be used for the construction manager at risk contract, which again, you won't get to see that till next month, but it would match the same type that we would have with the design.
So the next 2 bullet points, the basic AE design services and the basic AE construction services are basic services. That's all one contract for the B-133. But the accounting or the compensation calculation just says that it's split up at 5.75% for the design services and 1.25% of the building construction cost. So, and again, that's basic services. You can see in that top bar, just everything that you would expect for basic engineering services for a building of this stature, of this level of complexity, and all of the components that are necessary in this building would include all of our subcontracts with our consultants, civil, landscaping, structural, HVAC, plumbing, electrical, lighting, communications, so forth. This kind of a little bit of a repeat, but the basic AE construction services, again, it's that, what do we do there? That's this day-to-day administration and the connection between the construction company and all of our design team members, so that we are in constant, probably daily contact as we work our way through the construction process, where we have somebody in our office who is facilitating just the entire engine moving. There's a host of submittals, so there's a lot of paperwork that we process once the project is in, once the construction manager starts to buy out their contracts with their subcontractor. There's an entire submittal approval, review process, and then there's some back and forth. Sometimes those submittals, what they provide us doesn't work. Sometimes they have to resubmit. We have to answer questions with regard to how the changes that are necessary and so forth. The contractor, the construction manager is going to ask throughout the project. They will provide a number of requests for information or RFIs. So it's our job to be able to respond to those RFIs, and we'll be doing that over really a 3-year window, 2 years plus for the construction of the courthouse, and 1 year or thereabout for the construction of the existing courthouse. We will process and approve pay applications on a monthly basis during this phase. And then the basic services are those site visits that we spoke to, where we have somebody here, at least one or if not 2 people on site, and you can see that number is 72 times. So roughly 3 years, about twice a month, 72 visits to the site. And then there is this augmented AE construction services. And again,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but the 72 times, does that include an OAC meeting?
yes,
Okay.
yes.
I assumed it did, but it doesn't specifically say that.
Right. So this augmented AE construction services are those additional site services. So you can see that this is still part of the basic contract. It's just an additional services within that contract. And you can see that that construction phase, as it starts to get more intense, 33 to 50% construction complete, we estimate there's probably about a 6-month period of time there where there will be 40 additional man-hours. So typically, that's several additional trips during that phase. And then between the 50 and 75% complete, you can see there's about a year of 120 additional man-hours per month. How we split that up, we want to keep a little bit of elbow room in that because we want to be able to tailor that additional service to the actual construction process and what's happening. So this is just an estimate of those additional man-hours during that phase that would be needed. And then finally, between 75 and 100%, about 6 months of 60 additional man-hours toward the back end of it. So it's most intense during that 50 to 75% period. Again, underneath this AIAB 133, there's a separate contract for furnitures, fixtures, and equipment as an additional service, which is 8% of our of your total FF&E value. And I think that's the sum total of the agreement.
Correct.
And so,
And again, not all of that is in one fiscal year. That's spread out, and that would, part of these costs would be represented in something that we would go out for debt financing on as we got farther down the line. There any questions about the percentages or the schedule per se and guidance in terms of us pursuing?
I'll just make a quick comment. The percentages part, I don't ever really have to deal with that part. So whether they're in line or not, my background I don't have that. I can tell you, just a quick comment, that typically speaking, AIA documents are generally viewed to be very fair to both sides. So I mean, I'm glad that that's where we're going and that's what we're using. And what you've got shown, it looks like it covers everything. I don't see anything that is not there. I think you've got the communications and building. So I think what you're showing us is typical on a project of this size and magnitude of what the design firm has to do. The CA work, it's very expensive, but it's necessary. Kyle can't run around and answer all of that. If something comes up and the contractor in the field has a question about your design, well, guess what? You got to answer it. And so, and that does take time, but that's part of the way your field works. So the other, just quick comment though, and first meeting, and we'll tell you up front, if there's a flaw in the design, we're also coming back to you, right? So, yes, if the contractor has a question, has a problem, and it turns out that it's on the design side, it's very important to us to make sure that we have a partner that's going to step up and say, yep, we'll take full ownership of that. So anyway, don't want to put a damper on the first meeting, but you got to get that out.
Just get that out.
Yeah.
I just have one quick question, just for clarity, and that, I guess it's the slide before that one there, where we had the breakdown of the cost, the augmented construction administration, 468. Is that what that additional augmented
Yeah.
services is? Is that
Yes,
what that is?
that 468 is then, if you'll go back to the next, so, yeah, that group right there, Commissioner.
Yeah, that augmented, that portion of the hours, that's where the 468 came in.
Yes, it
Okay,
is.
I'm with you.
And that would increase if we go to the early site package, the
Sure.
enabling package.
Yeah, but you said 10,000 a month.
Approximately $10,000 a month.
And that's based on need, right? Or when you say 40 additional during those different phases, if you don't need to come in, you won't come in, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
I think, again, what we want to do is be able to tailor that elbow room to the project construction schedule. I will say this about, your reference about, what's the going rate for, a design fee for a project like this. This is priced because of its level of complexity, and it is complex. And you saw earlier in the schedule that, we have a 5-year relationship that we're talking about here. A number of firms that are being involved throughout a lot of mouths to feed, a lot of time. In addition to that, there's a component of this in the relationship with the construction manager at risk. This is just the nature of the way that this project goes. Is there's an extra layer of collaboration and meetings and communication and time in managing that whole construction manager at risk project. There's another body at the table. There's another whole series of protocol that you have to deal with, which you don't typically find if it's what they call a traditional design, bid, build contract. You don't have the contractor sitting there at the table during pre-design. You're doing all of that work kind of in a vacuum, and then you hard bid the project. So that whole area of collaboration doesn't exist in a CMR, construction manager at risk contract. So that adds a level of complexity. The very fact that you have 2 buildings that you're dealing with here, that you have this phased design and phased construction, it's just the level of complexity that you're dealing with. The courthouse by its nature it's not an office building. It's already a complex building. So the types of specialties that you have to get into with security, audiovisual and so forth, there's a certain level of complexity in designing that. So I believe that this percentage is very fair, and given just the duration of the project, the folks that are involved, and the level of complexity that we're dealing with.
I think just from staff's perspective, to date, our dealings with Cillian Architects and our dealings with Messer Construction has been outstanding. And the collaboration with our staff and keeping Kyle and Jonathan moving forward, but then also between the 2 of them, the communication has been fantastic to date. So we expect nothing less as we move through this. So.
And you were talking about the percentage, and both Blake and myself and Liz all were on the school board at some point. And, obviously, schools don't cost what this is costing. And the complexity is not there either. But the percentage is very much fair and in line, just for my little 2 cents worth. The only difference that I see, is a couple of little things where you got an extra expense here and an extra expense there. And with the school contracts, most of the time, it's just a rate. That's it, 5%, 7%, whatever it might be. But yours broken down with the 1 1/4 for a portion and then the 5 3/4 for another portion, which you're looking at 7% that way. But all in all, though, I'm pleased that we're moving at a pace that we are. And only thing that sort of grieves me a little bit is when we get it all done, it'll be in 2024. I'm not sure that I'll be around that time. That's a long ways from now. But obviously in 2022, our term's in, especially mine and Diane's and Blake's. But maybe we'll be around to see all that happen and celebrate that, so we'll see. Thanks, guys.
Okay, additional questions? I think that means we absorbed all of that.
Okay, so I will be coming in front of you in the regular session, asking for the approval to initiate the contract. And based on the conversations we've had here today, to initiate that contract, we are going with the site-ready enabling early project, meaning we would not turn Silling loose to start design in March 1st before, knock on wood, we had a lot of positive feedback in terms of means. Is that correct?
That is my interpretation,
Okay.
yes.
That's not written out in the agenda item, and I just want to make sure that with everything we've said tonight, we've been trying to be very transparent in every single thing that's gone on. So I want to make sure that that's the way we should proceed.
I guess I'm gonna circle back to my original comment, was what, if the schedule shifts to 2 months, and we're doing what we can do, the early site work, well, what's the cost of that is X. Well, if we just, instead of December of 2021, 22, I mean, if everything just moves 2 months, I'm not sure why is that a hard end date that we're looking at to then justify what we're trying to figure out whether we want to spend on the front end? Maybe I should have asked that to begin with, so. Does Kyle's looking like that doesn't make any sense?
No, I think and they can correct me if I'm wrong, I think the advantage is that the longer window of construction time for that site work, that we're starting earlier with more favorable conditions. So the benefit comes at the beginning by being able to start the site work earlier.
It really, whether it's March the 1st or May the 1st, I think the target is to hit an early enabling package, site package, or whatever you want to call it, just because it gives Messer a greater opportunity to do some work in the spring and summer of 2020. And the further that you delay
At a
that.
cost, and I guess that's what I'm trying to figure out, what, that's a number that we are gonna have to, I mean, I guess when we fish
Yeah,
through
so
here, that we
so the
need to
question
know
is,
what
if it were 6 months earlier, let's say, and that added $60,000 to our design by $10,000 a month, does that $60,000, is that $60,000 meaningful? Is that investment make Messer's construction less expensive? Does it make their pre-construction services less expensive? All of those questions. I don't know, is it fair for, can we?
Well, we can bring up, we have Steve Kekas from Messer, and he is here today to see what this meeting was like, and I'm sure we can ask him that question. I think what he will probably tell you is that you would see a higher contingencies carried in their GMPs because of starting at the later time.
Let him come up and talk.
Yeah,
Okay?
bring him up. Mr. Chairman, I hate to bog us down, but I think this is an important piece of the puzzle.
Pretty important investment.
Thank you all for having me here. Really what we're talking about by doing that early package is advancing the construction, so in the savings of money, instead of starting where you're going to be into heavy winter or heavier winter where you're going to have rains and protection, it allows us to get the construction started and protected so we can go through the winter saving money. The other thing you're going to save money on is buying out packages earlier with the inflation and with the time durations to try to advance that. And there'll be a savings in that as well. To sit here today and tell you what that dollar would be, I cannot do that. But there are other inherent savings that will come through this as well.
Steve, could you explain buying out packages, since that we haven't brought your contract up in front of them yet?
Sure. So once we get to the GMP phase, the guaranteed maximum price phase, we'll finish the construction documents. You'll have a guaranteed max what that phase of the work's going to cost. We need to, as a team, work together, finish the construction documents, then put that out in the marketplace under the public bidding rules, taking the bids in, and then awarding those packages. That's the buyout process, so we can allow those packages to proceed. The sooner we get to those, the more economics we can build in, the more things we can try to save money with by doing that.
And what he's referring to is the current escalation in the market.
Yes, sir.
And every month that goes by, how much that increases.
Okay. All right, so just to wrap it up, as far as I'm concerned, in your professional opinion, is it worth $60,000?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's well.
If it was my money, I'd be spending it. Yes, sir.
Other questions?
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, it certainly is a project that we have talked quite a bit about over quite a long period of time, so it's exciting to see it get moving. Next item is 4.2, and that is regarding our rules of procedure for the Board of Commissioners. I know that all of you have looked at that and have asked some questions about it. I have asked some questions as well. And the one thing that I tried to look at were what were the changes between the old and the new. My conclusion with talking with the clerk, Lauren, and also our attorney is not a whole lot. Just cleaning up a few items. Is that fair to say? So we'll certainly open up the floor for any questions that anybody might have about anything specific in that regard. Yes, ma'am.
So I have a question about the remote participation. I get that for the regular meetings. What about closed sessions?
I know it doesn't address those specifically. It's really the same. Just have to make sure that it's a secure line, you know, and some of those things to make sure that the person who's not there, you know, is just by themselves and discussing it, just them, you know, no one else being involved. But that's also, you know, part of the deal with even open session as it's worded, you know, so.
Okay. And then the only other question I have was, for public hearings, you know, if you have 30 people that show up to speak for or against something, and they've all signed up on yellow cards, can someone assign their time, their yellow card, their time to someone? So if there's 30 people and they want to give their 3 minutes, somebody could have that long?
That's the way we've typically done it, but it's really up to the board on that. You can set specific rules for a specific meeting based on the number of people that show up. You can give them, there's nothing in the statute that says you have to give them 3 minutes. That's just something that's been kind of standard, you know, but if you have, you know, a whole room of people and it looks like it's going to be, you're going to be there for 4 or 5 hours, you can set the rules to kind of keep the meeting within a reasonable length of time. But I think the way it's been done here, in the times we've had that come up, and elsewhere that I've seen, has been that you can assign your time to someone else. So that way you use somebody as a spokesperson to give them a little bit more time to present the views of several people, you know.
Okay. Other questions? Now, I think that remote provision was not in our old rules of procedure. Is that correct?
There was no provision about it, you know.
No provision. So that is a new thing that's added.
And the School of Government, because Lauren and I discussed this, they really don't know how to deal with it themselves. They have different thoughts on it, depending on who you talk to over there about it. But you're allowed to do it, from what I've seen. And I know other jurisdictions that do it. And we've done it here, like, I think Steve reminded me when he was in China, we did it for him. And I couldn't think of that time. I knew we'd done it here, but we can't remember it from the
Even before that, previous board.
Right.
Just through my research through the School of Government, they just noted that the law was unclear, that it was really up to each jurisdiction, and if they wanted to create maybe a policy around that for their jurisdiction, that's kind of what they suggested, but there is really no law that says which way to go.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? All right, then we will move to item 4.3, budget for the sale of Mount Pleasant Middle School site, and looks like it's Kyle back again.
Good evening, again. The county sold the Mount Pleasant Middle School site for $589,024.48 in the fall of 2018. The proceeds have been set aside for use in a northeast area park. Currently, a need exists for up to $100,000 of those funds to be utilized for establishing a parking area for the current ball fields that exist behind the old school site in Mount Pleasant. The remaining $489,024.48 have been set aside for improvements to a future northeast park. So what this stems from, and I don't know how much time you would spend down on the ball in the small ball fields in Mount Pleasant, but if you're ever down there in a weekend, you would see all the cars that are parked up along the street. And you know that on that site, and this might go back to a lot of the aerials we sold the main site, and then we held the 4.2 acres that had the small ball fields on it. It also had a tennis court on it. We had used a civil engineer to come in and do a feasibility study about putting a parking lot where that tennis courts was located, because we knew as we sold the main parcel, we would lose a lot of the area where the people park, because quite frankly, that's where they were parking. We've come up with a solution which would be minimal. We'd be tearing down the fences and basically crack sealing the tennis court and creating an extremely rudimentary parking lot. And we feel confident that we can do that for $100,000. In fact, I've already signed off on the actual design package for that to get the ball rolling, because as you know, ball season starts, if I'm not mistaken, March 11th is when they will start. So this would net us 63 spaces, which is including 3 ADA spaces. Now, you might ask yourself, well, that doesn't facilitate all the cars that are down there on a weekend, because I've driven through there. You're correct. It does not. That is the best the site can handle for that type of funding. In fact, if you wanted to increase the amount that you would spend out there in a parking lot, the best any of the engineers could figure out how to put on there would be 89. And it would take some significant finagling of the current stormwater conveyance system, which is more swales than anything.
The reason why we're trying to minimize the cost, as we've discussed previously, is that this is temporary. We hope to relocate those ball fields at some time in the near future, whether it's in the new park or whether it's somewhere else that the town may have some property. So we were trying to, it may be a couple of years to get through, but this should last us a couple of years at least, and then whoever buys the property when we decide to vacate it completely will have a gravel parking lot, or it's gravel.
No, it actually, yes, I'm sorry, it is gravel. Will be some sealing and some gravel.
Okay, additional questions?
Kyle,
And-
yeah,
Yes.
I do, Mr.
Mhm.
Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Kyle, so is that removing the current tennis courts, or we will be?
If I'm not mistaken, that option was, I haven't gotten to the full-blown design. That was a feasibility. I think it's milling it down, grinding it down, sealing it, and then coming back with a gravel, if I'm not mistaken. And again, we don't have the first meeting with the town of Mount Pleasant about this project, because obviously it has to meet their zoning requirements, is this Wednesday.
We've had some discussions with Mount Pleasant, so they're aware we're doing this, and we're looking for a more permanent location for this. And they knew you would set aside this money to benefit that park and a relocated park possibly. So they know what we're looking at doing and why we're looking at doing it, and they're well aware of the parking issues out there.
Yeah, I go down there, not often, but when my grandson played football, parking places were very scarce. And with us selling the old property, then they're more scarce now. But I'm with you, Mike, as far as keeping the costs down, because this is money that we will not recoup. Whoever buys this lot will not, they're not going to buy a specific parking lot. So we throw $100,000 in it. Obviously, we lose that, and it's going to be for the sole benefit of the parking of those that play ball there. And quite honestly, with you, I don't know how the rest of the board feels. This is just my opinion. I think that's pretty excessive for a gravel parking lot. That's just my thoughts. It's like I said, I think that there might be, something else that could reduce that cost. I don't know what that something else would be. And I know that, you have to have money to get things done. But with the knowing that we're going to be getting rid of that property relatively soon. Also, there was some interest by the people that wanting to do the library. Is that moving forward or anything going on that?
We've had a lot of discussions on the library. Right now, we do not have the funds to relocate or expand the library. However, that is one of the locations we would look to do that in the future. But there's several other projects that are already planned and that would happen before that, so. But there's other sites and locations that are also being researched and offered as well, in addition to that site, so.
Sure. Well, obviously, it's in a good location because, the school was there for all those years and the people are still using it. And we can't just vacate because they don't have nowhere else to go. So we have to use it. We have to use it. I realize that. And we have to create a way for them to park. But, I'll leave it with this. I just would like to see us really try to reduce that amount because every dollar we throw into that is money that we're not going to recoup. We'll just be throwing it away toward parking. And when we sell it, they're not going to give us anything for that.
I think that number does include some contingency as well. So we're going to do the minimal that we can do based on the zoning codes of Mount Pleasant. And then also, we want to make sure it's durable enough to withstand the cars because it's going to be busy in there.
We will be as cost-effective as we can, but with the current environment with civil work, I did not want to take any chances. The actual OPCC that I got from the engineer did have that number, that $100,000 has contingency in it. But I want to be careful because a lot of the bids I'm putting out right now are anywhere from 22 now to 32% higher.
What is
year
an
to year.
OPCC?
Opinionated projected construction cost.
Well, I've got enough confidence in you, Kyle, that you will try to save money on this project. There's no doubt about that. It's
Thank you,
just
sir.
when you look at limited funds and a space that we know we're not going to keep and knowing that we're not going to get it back, all of that's got to take play. So I'm sure you've done all that. So I got confidence in you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, additional questions or comments? And I think you are requesting that we suspend the rules and vote on this tonight so you can move ahead on that? Or
That is correct.
yes. So at this time, I would entertain a motion to suspend the rules to take action on this. Okay, we have a motion and a second to suspend the rules. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye. All opposed, no. That motion passes. And then I would entertain a motion to approve the budget revision and project ordinance to move forward on this parking lot project. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there more discussion?
Does the motion need to say up to 100,000, since that's what we said, and we kind of set that as a ceiling?
I think
Would it
that
be
would
more
I
proper?
think that would probably be wise. So you accept that, Ms. Honeycutt, and you second that, Commissioner Shue? So that motion will read, motion to approve the budget revision and project ordinance to proceed with the parking lot work at the Old Mount Pleasant Middle School site, not to exceed $100,000. Okay, any discussion on that? All in favor, please say aye. All opposed, no. That motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next item, don't go too, you're not the next item. You get a break. Proposed Back Creek Greenway, Jonathan Marshall and Daniel Steins.
I'm going to ask Daniel, who's the Parks and Recreation Director for the town of Harrisburg, to join us, and then Lauren is going to, Ms. Linker is going to pull up the plans that he'll be discussing. The town of Harrisburg is in the design process for a Back Creek Greenway. Part of that greenway would be located, or is proposed to be located, on the properties where Hickory Ridge Middle and High School are. And as you're probably familiar, bless you, as you're familiar, the county owns one of those parcels for financing reasons, and the schools own the other. So Mr. Steins has already been before the school board and gotten their approval for this project to continue design and for the construction of the greenway on those parcels, and then the county is the other part of that interlocal agreement. So he'd like to go through the larger project with you and explain what they're looking at doing, and then we'll also at the end of this discuss a piece of land that we own on Stallings Road that may also factor into this and something to consider as we move forward. Daniel?
Thank you, Jonathan. Is this on?
Yep, it was already on.
I'm sorry. My apologies. Thank you all for having me, and I do appreciate all the work, and I'd like to give credit to Mr. Marshall and Mr. Louder for working with us up until this point with this project. This has been a discussion within Harrisburg community for a number of years. I guess I'm just the first director to kind of start working towards some more action in regards to acquisitions and ownerships and usages of land or partnerships of land. So we've employed Worth and Associates last fall to start working with us to formalize an alignment and look at our existing acquisitions that we have within the town of Harrisburg, and then most importantly look at our gaps that we had to complete this greenway segment. So the Back Creek Greenway would be a main artery right in the middle of Harrisburg, more or less, connecting in the neighborhood of about 1,400 homes with the schools and with the park system in Harrisburg. So the beginning here is at Caldwell Road. And I also want to mention that this alignment was not only identified in Harrisburg's master plan for greenway pedestrian use, but it was also identified in the Carolina Thread Trail for Cabarrus County as a top priority as well. The connectivity systems trail plan for Cabarrus County that was done about 10 years ago. We're actually having discussions of doing an update on that now. So there's a number of plans that identify the priority of this, and it's why it's important to us too. So we're at Caldwell Road at the farthest east point of this, and if you go a little further east, you're in Mecklenburg County by just shy of a mile. We own some property there where the proposed parking lot you see there in the light blue, and then the yellow is the actual trail alignment that we're looking at, and then the darker purple is kind of the Back Creek, if you can make sense of that. So if you move to the next slide, this would be, I think, Orchard Park community, and we're coming across and getting into a continuation of Orchard Park. We have the existing easements that was actually done by the county a number of years ago. So there's kudos to their planning department for being proactive in acquisitioning for trails 15 years ago. So these were put in place before Harrisburg even had a planning department. If you continue to move to the west to the next slide, to sheet 3, or to the next, we're then coming off of the Orchard Park, going through Windsor Forest. We're showing tie-ins with their local HOA amenities as well. So it'd be their pool house, clubhouse, so that all these residences are tied directly into this greenway system. At this point, we're kind of moving more into a couple private landowners. If you'll go to the next sheet, please. And we're working with those members and coming up to Hickory Ridge Road, which is where we're then getting to the schools, I believe. No, we're not quite there yet. So we're at Bridgepoint Community now, so we'll actually, that's Robinson Church Road. There's actually there's a 3 culvert underpass that's on this road that is looking like we will be able to use that to utilize to go under versus an at-grade crossing at this road. And if you keep moving, we're now at Hickory Ridge where we're entering the school's property. We've had conversations with the International Foursquare Church, where we're also working on an easement with their property. And working with Mr. Cook, our attorney, I think what we arrived at is not necessarily a deeded type easement in this arrangement with the school's property, but more so an interlocal agreement or a partnership rather that would be more or less in perpetuity or the life of the greenway itself. So in other words, we construct a greenway and we've got the interlocal agreement for the life of that greenway. If for some reason 20, 50 years down the road we decide an alternate route is better, or there's other means of another route and the greenway comes up, then the agreement goes away. So we're at the middle school there. If we go to the next slide, you'll kind of see how we're kind of going from the middle school's property as close to the creek as possible, just staying out of the floodplain, and then moving over into some more or less open space that's running kind of parallel with Hickory or Ragin Ridge extension coming over toward the high school's property. We utilize the soccer fields behind the middle school currently, so we're kind of just riding the boundary between that and the floodplain. If you can go to the next slide, you'll see where we're kind of ending, coming across and utilizing the bridge at the Ragin Ridge Road, and then coming into the land that Mr. Marshall had mentioned as a possibility of the town acquiring for usage of this parking lot or trailhead for this greenway. So this would be at Stallings Road. I think there's 6-7 acres roughly there. Most is predominantly a floodplain, of course, but where the parking lot is about the only high knoll you have within that piece of land there. I think it was part of the original acquisitioning of the high school's property back when that was done.
That was actually when we were we were going through that project to extend Raging Ridge and connect to Stallings Road to give that two points of access to those two schools. And we bought the right-of-way or bought the area to extend that from the property owner. We were leaving her with a remainder that was all floodplain, so we ended up purchasing all that land. And at this point, we don't have any purpose for it. So whether it was through a lease or transfer to the town of Harrisburg, we would probably bring that back before you fairly soon with some kind of arrangement as we work that out where they could possibly use this for another trailhead parking. So that allows all those neighborhoods on Stallings Road then to use this parking area and access the greenway.
Right. So essentially, this is kind of what we're considering phase one of the Back Creek Greenway. This is about 3.44 miles in total from parking head on Caldwell to parking head here at Stallings. The future of this trail would go and tie into the Fuda Creek Trail system, where we've already got what we call a closed circuit trail system in a neighborhood. We have a couple of greenways within Harrisburg, but they're non-connecting routes at this point. So the next phase would be traveling further south and tying into the Fuda Creek, which then eventually ties into the Rocky River, which is part of the county's the Carolina Thread Trail component. So it's no different than any greenway discussion you've probably heard. It's essentially connecting communities and people, parks, and we think it's a great safe route to school project for the community of Harrisburg. Stallings Park is just a stone's throw up the road. We are working on road improvements for Stallings that would include sidewalk connectivity, so there would be the added bonus there. Again, we've been to the Board of Education with good review, and so far we're still just working on the alignment details, and then the next part would be surveying. To be fully transparent, the only thing that could affect what we feel is most likely the alignment that we have now would be some very, very recent discussions that the Water Sewer Authority, Cabarrus County, Wassac has came to us. County management may be a little bit of aware of this, that the City of Charlotte Water Authority has approached them about creating a larger line on the Back Creek alignment. There's an existing one there. They have some utility unmet needs in the northern part of Charlotte, and they're looking to upgrade that line. Whether or not that happens is solely contingent on whether Charlotte Water Authority is going to fund that project. Obviously, if that was actually to happen, we are talking with Wassac to see just exactly what that looks like. Are they going to utilize their existing easements and just widen and make it happen, or are they going to do something alternate? If they were to utilize their existing easement, they would actually be on the north end of the creek versus we're currently on the south end. I still think it's worth us pursuing our set plan, because in my conversations with Wasac, it's a very low priority on their end, and it's going to be a several $million project on Charlotte's end to make it happen. And there is an alternate for them to go south to the Fuda Creek line on their end in Charlotte. So I just want to put that out there just in case, just so there's full transparency on everything we're doing. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions? Well, it looks like a good use of the property. I do recall those conversations when we acquired that property as to the limited uses available, and this appears to be a good one. So we thank you.
Oh, thank y'all. Thank y'all very much. Good. All right. Have a good night.
Okay, next item, 4.5, raw water line easement at Cottle Creek. Jonathan.
The city of Concord has employed an engineering group to look at bringing another raw water feed into their treatment plant at Cottle Creek. As you may be aware, the property that water treatment plant sits on is actually owned by the county, and then we lease that to the city, and there's a number of blanket easements with that. They do not include the property across 73, which is where these proposed easements are. So they needed to come before you and ask for easements for that raw water line that they're designing. And again, this brings water from the reservoir down to the treatment plant.
Would this be in any way impacted by the proposed widening of 73? We saw several alternate plans for that at the meeting last week. I've received quite a few emails from some of those residents out there that are very concerned about those alternate routes. Is this in any way impacted by any of that?
I think certainly it would be. I haven't seen their exact project schedule. I believe this would precede it. So the engineering for 73, should they continue in the existing corridor, would have to account for this.
Mm-hmm.
There are, as you said, 4 alternates are looking at around the reservoir. 2 of those follow the existing 73 route. One is a bridge over the 2 segments of the lake that it goes south of 73, and one is a widening of the land bridge or the causeway there. But there's also 2 routes that go south and relocate 73. So yes, it would be affected, and there is, as you said, that's another issue that there is a lot of concern about what is proposed for 73 and what those decisions are.
Right. Okay, any other questions or comments? All right, we'll move to item 4.6, Department of Transportation, 5310 Elderly and Handicap Grant. Happy to have Bob Bushy with us.
Thank you and good evening. We come before you with a federal 5310 Elderly and Handicap Grant administered through the City of Concord. This will be the second time we have utilized this grant. As the direct recipient, the federal government runs this through the City of Concord, and they put out a call for projects. So we had to fill out an application and do a presentation before the city. We currently receive 5310 Elderly and Handicap money through our ROPE grant from the state. This grant is the federal portion that will help cover trips in the urban area. After the presentation, we have been awarded, if you accept it, $170,182. There is a 50% match because it is a federal grant. However, we are allowed to use money from our home care community block grant as well as the elderly and handicapped portion of our ROPE to make up that match. So there would not be any new local money needed to match this program. So we will ask at the commissioners meeting to hold a public hearing and then to accept the grant and the associated paperwork.
Okay, questions? One question I have is exactly what service does this grant provide for seniors? How do people qualify? Are there income requirements?
The requirement in the state portion of the elderly and handicapped is a little different than the federal. The federal's requirement is 65 years of age. state is 60. So we have to balance it for the people that qualify under each one. We take them to medical appointments. For the seniors, the handicap portion, we just require a letter from the doctor stating that they are handicapped, and then they can use it for medical services or.
So these are specifically limited to medical trips. Is that correct? I
They
know
don't have to be.
At one point in time, we had some other trips,
Right.
but our funding, we had to limit those back. So that is our decision that those are medical trips.
To stay within the funding,
Right.
we stay
because
with the
that's-
medical trips.
We have enough medical trips to use up all the money that's available.
Correct.
Right, okay. Okay, any other questions? All righty, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, next item from Finance, Cabarrus County Courthouse Reimbursement Resolution. We're happy to have Susan Fearington.
As part of our debt process, we have a reimbursement resolution that we present for you to peruse and approve each time we go out for debt. And this is just a sort of a timing thing where we will be able to, if we have to spend some of our expenditures prior to issuing our debt, we can do that and then reimburse ourselves. So this has to be in place for us to be able to do that. It's never too early to go ahead and get this in place. I could have waited 6 months to a year and did this, but we want to go ahead and get that in the process.
Okay, pretty standard procedure. Anybody have questions?
Just one quick question. After we reviewed the courthouse process and the monies that you're speaking about here, and we've done these many times, but we talked about the soft costs. Is that what this is going to be? And what percentage, or, I mean, obviously you only have so much money to work with in the general fund. So is there a way that they limit that? Are you limited? I mean, say we have $5 million in soft costs that we're going to be reimbursed when we get the loan.
Right. Currently, right now, we try and, like we do with our schools, we try and use our own cash for upfront things like architect and engineer and just borrow for the construction phase. So as we stand right now, we're still planning just to borrow money for the construction phase, site development, and probably our contingency for the courthouse. But as time gets closer by, if the funds are not available, then we may have to issue more debt. But right now, that's the plan, and it looks like we're gonna make that timeline. Down the back end, we may have to maybe use some of our contractor sales tax savings or maybe some of the interest income to pay for some of the furniture and fixtures. But right now, there's still the plan to just borrow for the construction and site work. So for example, if we needed to break ground a couple months earlier and before we get our actual proceeds, we'd be in the process of getting our debt approved by the local government commission, but just the timing of when the debt proceeds are received, we might have to pay the contractor before that. That's what this ensures us so we can get reimbursed. But this is, right now, we're just planning to use this for our construction and site work.
Right, yeah, I was familiar with that. It's just, I guess, the soft cost, because obviously we couldn't lay out $15 million and knowing that we're going to get it back, but, but I think I understand what you're talking about.
Okay, any other questions? All right, thank you. Okay, next, library copier fees. We're happy to have Emery Ortiz with us.
Good evening. So to account for the fact that we have new copiers and printers in each of the libraries and that the public can now print in color for the first time, we are proposing increasing the fees from 15 cents to 25 cents per page. And that would be for black and white or for color prints. But that should help even out the costs. And from what I understand, it's still much cheaper than a FedEx or Kinko's pricing, so.
And that copier also accepts credit cards, so there's fees on top of that we did not have before.
Which is something that library patrons have been asking for quite some time, so that's
Yes.
a big advancement. And that was the question I had, what would this cost if you go to UPS store, FedEx, and
Some places are $1 a page for
Really? Okay.
color and, yes. So we're still doing pretty good comparatively.
Right. Okay, any questions? Very good, thank you. Okay, next item, tax administration. advertisement of 2018 delinquent taxes, and we're happy to have David Thrift.
Good evening. So North Carolina General Statute 105-369 requires that I, report to you the amount of unpaid taxes for the current fiscal year that are liens on real property. So for the 2018 tax billing, the real property taxes that are unpaid are currently $8,280,326.16. From that, we subtract the amount of those accounts that are currently in bankruptcy, that amount being $75,468.04, for the total lien on real property of $8,204,858.12. So this statute also requires that upon receipt of this report, the board must order the tax collector to advertise those tax liens. I would request that the advertisement date be set for March 24th, 2019. The reason we wait that period of time to advertise is it allows us, once ordered, we send a notice to all the registered record owners of those properties, giving them the amount of the outstanding balance and the fact that that advertisement is scheduled, allowing them an opportunity to pay that balance so they don't meet that advertisement period. So our requested action then is just a motion to approve the report of the 2018 outstanding tax balances that are lien on real property, and to order the tax administrator to advertise these liens in the Independent Tribune on March 24th, 2019.
Okay, questions for David? I'm just curious, what does it cost us to advertise those? I mean, it's many pages in the newspaper.
So the total advertising cost is actually applied to these accounts. So
they
the advertising is
actually pay
dispersed
the
to
cost
account.
of the advertisement?
That's correct. So as we collect these delinquent account funds, that goes towards the cost of that advertising.
Right, okay. All right, any other questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, we now move to the approval of our regular meeting agenda. And I think from our previous discussion, we wanted to add the item about the sheriff's office positions for his new plan. And we can do that either in new business or we can do that in our consent agenda. What would be your pleasure? Okay, so that would make that be F10. Are there any other changes or additions that anyone has? We've got a public hearing scheduled for 5310 grant, yep. Okay, hearing none other, I would entertain a motion that we approve the regular meeting agenda as amended. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye. All opposed, no. And that motion passes. We do have need of a closed session tonight. So I would entertain a motion to go into closed session to discuss pending litigation and economic development per North Carolina General Statute 143-318.11 A3 and 4. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye. All opposed, no. We are now in closed session. Thank you.